Nevertheless, many people still assume these superficial distinctions are true of everyone whose ancestors come from a given continent, perhaps because they haven't had the opportunity to observe the differences among them. The stereotypical looks that we associate with a so-called race are, if anything, representative of the farthest corners of the globe. Worse yet, some would take a sociobiological approach to correlate visual stereotypes with assumed differences in behavior. Because the word race implies an unscientific distinction, in this class we'll use the term racial groups to refer to the way society separates individuals based on a few visible genetic traits we've labeled as important. It's not hard to see where these superficial stereotypes of regional biology don't work, as this Indian man, who would usually be labeled as Asian, is far darker than this San woman of Botswana, who would be often labeled as black. Racial labels are often applied to whole continents or global regions, but this photo project made amalgamated pictures of many different women to show a rough average of what people look like in different parts of the world. The stereotypical looks of a white person can be seen in Northwest Europe, but moving just a bit south and east, some features start to change. What exactly separates one racial group from another gets more difficult as you look more closely, and where exactly would you draw the line geographically? If you look specifically at individuals from any one part of the world, not just continents, but local groups, you see how much variety is present. This doesn't even take into account the fact that, as we are all one species, we've been migrating, intermarrying, and having children across national and racial borders for all of human history. In which group would you place these two American women? Increasingly, Americans are recognizing themselves as interracial. Yet race remains a powerful label that we place on people. Our concepts of race, while based around biological features, exist in our culture far more than in our genes. The process of racial formation is how we construct these categories. Today, in America, we largely see anyone of European descent as white. Yet at one time, our racial formation placed people from different parts of Europe into different racial groups. White Europeans being the dominant group in United States history, Irish and Italians were seen as outsiders into the 20th century. As people of African descent have been an important part of the population since the country's founding, there have always been what we'd call interracial Americans. We'll talk about the issues of racial caste inequality later in the semester, but for now, remember that even cultural ideas about what makes a person black are social constructions that have changed over time. Social constructionism is an offshoot of micro-level interactionism, the idea that individuals build social structures through shared actions and understandings. Reality is a social construction that is real because we mutually believe that it is real. So two people may genetically be more similar to each other than to others in their respective racial groups. But if we have constructed our racial formation to place them into different groups, then the Thomas theorem predicts that society really does separate them. This is why our cultural assumptions can be such a powerful bias in social research. So, is there any objective, meaningful difference between groups of people beyond our social constructions? Missy Elliott and Garth Brooks are American musical artists, both shown here behaving symbolically with the clothes they wear, both American styles, yet both also originating from different groups within this land. Although human groups haven't been separated long enough to develop significant differences genetically, we've seen that an individual can adapt culturally within their own lifetime. In that case, several generations of people living in the same area, learning from one another and adapting to the same conditions, could easily develop significant cultural differences from outside groups. This is what we traditionally call an ethnicity. Being from the same place may mean some common features and being part of the same racial group, but culture is the key thing that ties together an ethnic group. We refer to people from the islands of Japan who speak Japanese as Japanese people, or Nihonjin, in their own language. Japanese culture does have some unique traditions, including the kimono and sushi. Yet ethnic groups, like racial groups, are still in many ways a social construction. Your group status has as much to do with the labels others apply to you as it does with you or your family's actual origin. Cultures change, separate, merge, and overlap. People from specific countries in Central and South America and the Caribbean often self-identify their ethnicity as the particular country they are from. Yet, many also identify with a larger ethnic group of Latino, being from the areas known as Latin America, or Hispanic, being from Spanish-speaking countries. Although people from the United States often use Hispanic and Mexican interchangeably, and associate those words with a particular mix of Spanish and Native American genetics, Hispanic or Latino individuals can be of any race. Some struggle to be accepted as their own ethnic group because they aren't part of the expected racial group. Even among the Japanese, a more precise identity, there are the native Ainu people, who identify themselves as their own separate ethnic group. As much as an ethnic grouping can identify common heritage, cultures change over time, and individuals often assimilate to a new culture into which they have immigrated. This is often where hyphenated identities come in. A Japanese person raised in the United States may identify as both Japanese American or, more broadly, Asian American. Because many of these terms can be confusing, for the purposes of this class, when we say racial group, we mean the way that society has identified groups of people based on biological features. When we say ethnic group, we mean the way that society has identified groups of people based on their culture or origin. When we say nationality, we mean membership within a particular country or political state. For racial, ethnic, and many other ways that we label groups of people, social expectations may go far beyond any actual cultural or biological features. Stereotypes are broad generalizations applied to everyone identified as part of a certain group. Some may be based on actual cultural traits, and many others are created or manipulated through media. In some cases, they are tied into historical situations, those same vicious cycles of structuration W.E.B. Du Bois was trying to break. Next time, we'll talk in more detail about some of the cultural elements that distinguish various cultural groups, but it's important to keep in mind that even if there is any truth to a stereotype about a certain group, such as the traditional Chinese clothing shown here, those traditions may no longer exist, at least among a particular individual or group.